Hey, welcome back, guys. This next presentation called Powerful Node-Based 3D Compositing is really our look using Flame Premium, Flare, and Maya, as well as 3ds Max assets to dive into compositing with CG, as well as what we call our artist-driven versioning system for collaborating between multiple workstations with a version tracking system. So this is going to be a fun one. We actually got 4 guys working together on the booth here. You'll be able to see how that works well. And let me just start you off by explaining that assets coming into your building are going to go through this versioning system. You need to certainly think in terms of where Flare might fit into a way to be able to expand your bandwidth. The Flame Premium might be the one that's building master comps with Flare doing procedural compositing. We're going to dig into that in just a moment. But let me start by showing you some of our CG compositing techniques inside the Flame system here.
Hey, Melissa.
Yeah?
I think this is impossible.
Wanna head back?
Yeah. What was that?
Oh, nothing.
So that was a really cool master from the guys at Art Jail, showing off some of the shots we're going to jump into. Thank you for that, guys. So here I am just looking at a simple build of a set of EXR layers. What I've got here is one of the shots that you just saw go by. That was the one with the astronaut and some stuff happening in space. And what I wanted to point out to you is the fact that we're working with these assets here that were rendered out of 3ds Max. And they are floating point or high dynamic range assets. That means that there's detail in the highlights and shadows even that you may not see at first, but of course we're able to bring back that floating point data. We're looking here now in the raw linear color space of this asset. If we spin through here, you could see that there's mats, there's different pieces here, there's ambient occlusion. There's a normals pass. And normals are kind of a traditional way of getting the ability to do a little bit of relighting on your CG, right? So you might use this to do something like this. I'm just taking my environment here. Let's just tone it up a little bit to really see how you can do something, if you like, with a normals render. So you can come in here and you can adjust the direction of the light. It's kind of cool. But you might start to notice artifacts when you go too far with your edges. You're not really able to kind of override the kind of baked in the lighting that's kind of in the shots. So what do? I mean, ultimately you're just working with a 2D asset here with depth that's associated by a normals pass. That's how we do it there. But I wanted to show you kind of how you could up the ante by bringing in some more assets. Specifically, I've got here some Fbx assets, and those are the essentially the 3D assets that pass between a CG environment and a compositing environment like this. We're able to take advantage of some of the higher functions of Fbx, including frame point cache or geometry cache, and this stuff is actually very useful to us. If we just jump in here, you'll be able to see that the asteroids here that are sitting in the background are actually very dense CG meshes. So if I just look from the side here, you can see that these are now sitting in space. We're not using a render yet. We're actually taking the raw material as it is with its substance texture generator on it. So that's a special type of shader coming from 3D that we're able to read directly in through the Fbx. And it, by the way, these meshes are quite dense. I'm going to just play with that shader in a sec, but I want you to see that that we've got like a, I think it's up to, this object here is up to about almost 500,000 polys in itself, and this is just the beginning. So you could see that, that you can move geometry quickly in here, and that's a big part of why we would want to take this approach. It's the kind of more flexible approach. The next step might be to manipulate the pieces. So if we go in here, what we'll do is we'll just take a look at the rock a little more closely. You can see that what's actually happening here, as we just said, is that this is a shader, and that is then able to be customized. It's not just a wrapped UV. It is actually a generated material that I can change the attributes of. So I can come in here and say, I want a whole different sort of feel to this. I want to change its color. I want to change its size. I want to change things about it. I want to change how deep the parallax goes to get all sorts of different effects on my material. That's cool, but we could certainly noodle that for hours and maybe get a really cool look, but it's not quite the same as really having a wrapped render, is it? So this is a diffuse projector that we're using here that basically tells my system to wrap the render image around the geometry. So this is just the best way you could deal with this. Essentially, instead of UV wrapping it, which is going to give me a funky result, I'm going to projection wrap it. And of course, now I've got the best of both worlds. I've got my essentially high quality render with all the reflection, with all the lighting in it. You can see as I move down the shot, we can see this section. And I also have lighting that's very powerful to be able to kind of spin around in a full 360 if I want around my object. You can really get the idea that you could completely change the lighting strategy on this shot if that's what you wanted. So just a neat way of working. This is the power of having real geometry in your compositing environment. Let's just move on to look at one more example. And all I'll do is I'll go ahead and bring in my astronaut, and he sits here. So we'll go ahead and grab our little guy here. So then it's this guy right here. Our astronaut needs to come into here. We're going to bring him in like this. He does have an animated mesh to him. So that means that he's floating about there. You can see this is one more challenge, if you like, to dealing with this kind of environment. His content's actually over here. This is a little bit amazing how much kind of comes across, isn't it? As in the asset here, you could see that if I just sort of jump in on him a little bit, I can start changing things about him. I can change his basic material color if I want. I can change his shininess, the way he reacts to light if I'd like. And so it's kind of like a shader, isn't it? As I was saying, we're gonna play with this. We're gonna maybe mess with his normals a little bit. We could see his UV laid out there. We also have the ability to take that bump map here and soften it out so that he's no longer has the wrinkles if we choose. It's kind of a neat way to be able to have that level of manipulation of your objects, and of course he's affected by light, the same lights that are affecting this guy. So if I just spin around here, you can sort of see how I could get different looks on him too. So we'll just get him kind of lit from over there. And then don't forget that we've still got detail in there. What we could do then is work with our astronaut here and look at, okay, so things are working pretty well overall, but we might, one more thing that we can kind of work with here is to deal with errors, if you like, where the CG doesn't always work out perfectly with your live action. If we decided, okay, he's supposed to look like he's behind there. Now we could be rotoscoping, we could be dealing, but imagine if you could just come in here and just tweak it. So what I can do actually, if I'd like, is I can drill in on that geometry. This is his body right here, and add a deforming mesh, or essentially a grid, or a cage, I should say, that actually allows us to deform him a little bit. So if I needed, what I would do is I would take this moment in time here, and I would just let me just move it down a little bit here so that I can get advantage of that. So I'm just gonna drop him in here. I'm just gonna get a hold of his feet, and then I'm going to just set a start keyframe here and then an end keyframe when he's kind of past the car. And you can just see how subtly I could adjust this to just deal with those kind of edge problems. And what I can do is I can just pull him up, his toe sticking there, but we're okay. We're going to just show you how you can nudge up a foot to avoid an object and go from there. So a subtle adjustment. Indeed, you could make much more wild ones if you wanted, but it's just nice to have this flexibility all the way into post-production, into the sort of final compositing stage. So that's one example. We wanted to show you some really cool stuff that relates to collaborating on a shot. One of the shots in the final that you just saw there was actually an idea of creating the edge of the world, and this is just a neat example where if you were looking to build a kind of a big CG cliff that falls off into space here, this might be where you're starting. And if I just were to pull a track on this, I'm going to do a special kind of track, and this is an analyzer track, as we call it. So I'm going to do a sort of an analysis of the scene in 3D space and generate a track that comes back to us as a point cloud, and then a set of a camera that essentially views that point cloud. This is the foundation that we use for a lot of visual effects shots, just looking at the backplate right now. So you're better, if you're not familiar with those, I'll explain it a little bit so that you can see how with this automated analysis, sometimes you would use mats to remove things that are not static in your scene to get just the static objects analyzed. And then in this situation, if we just look in here, you'll be able to see how this works. It's a set of points that are trying to ignore any points that shouldn't be there. Maybe we'll just help it out a little bit there and remove some of those. This one here I want to do. But then what we can do here is we can just see how it's getting on. One thing that would be cool to look at would be the side view here. Let's just take a look at this view. And what you'll be able to see is that things really are in place, sort of in an interesting way, right? So let's just lose the grid for a second so that you can really see in here how this works. It's a neat technique to jump in on your footage here and then really see that your camera's moving, your points are still, you can feel the edge of the car there, and the ground, should really look flat. So this is just the technique that we use to get our foundation. If we wanted to, then we would just jump ahead to a little more work done on a pre-comp, where I've actually been putting in a sky replacement here, and then this would be one piece of the puzzle that then comes into essentially a bunch of mats attached to this camera. The locators are sitting here in space, and the technique here is that we're able to drop in essentially any object, text objects or comp objects. In this case, I'm just going to draw another mask to drop out this section. Let's just cut out the guy real quick so that you can see that when I make a mask inside a moving camera scene, it appears to move based on the fact that the camera is moving around the static points. So it's just a neat technique to work with. I thought that it'd be cool to see that. And then we wanted to move on to really get you to think about the bigger picture of checking in assets. I'm going to take a quick look at my smart export node here that is going to output to a SAN or a shared storage this shot as an asset for everyone to work with. The smart thing about this is that it does actually keep a track of the version numbers, and you'll be able to see how the different artists can work with each other's work progressively. This is a system that we call artist-driven versioning. So, how does it work? Well, think about how your assets come into your environment. They get versions from the very beginning. Whether they see a 3D application first or a compositing application that's working with backplates, they're going to make iterations of them. They're going to work, those pieces are going to work their way into subcomps. So pieces get put together, and then those subcomps get iterated. And then from there, you would go into maybe finer subcomps, and on really complex shots, you could have many layers of this that finally arrive in a master comp. But imagine the delta of all these versions that are sticking out below a master comp. We want to show you how we can have this way of handling that between multiple artists that, of course, check in things at different times of day. So So here we are. I've made my export, but there are actually 4 artists working together on this. And we're going to take a little peek into each one of them. So Daryl there is actually working on our cliffs. Maybe you'd explain a little bit about it.
Yeah, so this is a pretty straightforward shot. What we've got is the track data and the camera coming across through Fbx. And we've gone ahead and added some basic geometry that's going to represent that cliff. Then projected onto that geometry is some photographs that were taken from the live action shot. Went ahead and rendered this out, and we made 4 different versions when we did this render. So if we just jump over to our render view here, I can just jump through these very quickly. So these are rendered out as multi-channel EXR files that contain some information in there like vectors and depth information. So we've just got a few different versions of this cliff to supply to the creative finishing guy so that they can let the client sort of have different options as far downstream as possible. So on the 3D side, we're making versions just like everyone else.
Cool. And then next up, my colleague Toba-san here is sitting in the front row, kindly is helping us out with our space background. And this is really, he's kind of working in isolation a little bit. He uses my camera that I could export for him, but perhaps he hasn't met the client yet. He's just building what he thinks would look good. So he's making a version 1 for us. And it could be interesting to think about, how we would iterate that. So if you wouldn't mind just making us a little export node there, Toba, so we can see that you have the exact same thing. He's working on Flare on a laptop, actually. He's right there. And he's able to output a Monday version for us, right, Toba? So what we have there is his version 1. Let's jump over to Samit working in the back. Thank you, Samit, for helping us out with this. He actually has got the EXR render passes from Daryl there. He's working with my pre-comp. That's one of the assets. But we wanted to show you our really cool function called load as version, so that essentially any kind of asset coming in doesn't have to be one of our tools specifically. Could just be an EXR coming from wherever. We can just pick a new version of that asset here and start this artist-driven versioning process. We'll choose load as version, and that creates a paper trail. It creates the ability to roll back. Also here, he's going to just point out that the render passes, there could be hundreds of them, are reconnected via their naming taxonomy. So that means that wherever they were connected before, they now remain connected in a version 2. So those standard names, normals, beauty, will be maintained. Looking ahead at his kind of finished piece there, and what Sammy can do is to go ahead and output his more complex comp as his version 1. So let's do this. Let's come back to me where I have got actually his version 1, but I'm going to go and show you how I would grab what Toba just output. So this is a cool little piece. I'm going to just browse down onto the sand here, and I believe this is it, right? Huh. No, wait. This one. So he just made me a new one, and should have just one version to it, although maybe he's already done one. And what I'll do is I'll just connect this guy into here, and we'll ask him to we'll just take a look. Imagine I'm sitting down with my client for the first time, and I'm able to just take a look. I'm just kind of doing a simple comp here. I'm just really just dealing with the blend of the two at this point. So this is great. This is maybe all I want to work with at this point. Let's just look at the output there and see what I decide that, the clouds need to come up a little, the space needs to be a little less green. I need a version 2. So what I'll do is I'll ask Toba-san to make me a new one. And what he should be able to do here is just go ahead and start one off and hit process, if you wouldn't mind, Toba. So he's taking that to heart. Really going to fix it up for me. That's great, man. So go ahead and output. You can see his version numbering working there. And what we should see is, as soon as he starts, I can come back down to here and actually check for updated clips. So this is a great functionality where we can see, okay, has he really worked? Actually, he's actually rendering out as we speak. So I'm going to roll back here, and you can see the live work. up to a certain point, it's filling up slowly. It really is an instantaneous link, isn't it, where you can see how I've got that, I can pick, okay, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't have to Bugtober. I'm just going to roll back to version 2 and go with that. So you can see how this is really controlled by the artist, hence the name. One more scenario here is the situation where you might want to take over a comp from another artist if they're not available. And so what you might do here is to, rather than go through the versions, we're going to, maybe I need to change something deep down in his comp. I'm going to append this to my batch. So I'm going to bring out essentially his comp here. It's just contained in a group here, but I can get all the way into it. And hopefully you can really imagine that, you just ungroup it. You can really imagine how this feeds that. And I can come back in here and go back to his versions here and change it out. Or I could take a look at any other piece. So I could work with his comp. I could then look back into his kind of lighting solution here, and we'll maybe just make those last minute tweaks, give me a bit more CG to work with there, and then feed that back into my comp, and you'll be able to see how this is just a really efficient way of working collaboratively together. We call it our artist-driven versioning system, and appreciate you guys listening. You've been watching the Flame Premium, working together with Flare and Autodesk Maya, doing our artist-driven versioning system. So thanks for listening.